Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a literal masterpiece of human storytelling today. Written by the blind poet Homer, like 2,800 years ago, the Odyssey is pretty much the ultimate epic of survival. It picks up right after the Trojan War. You know, the conflict won by the sheer devious intellect of one guy, Odysseus. He built the infamous Trojan horse and proved he was the most cunning of all the Greeks. But here's the catch. That incredible intellect was matched by a deeply flawed, almost fatal sense of human hubris. 20. That is the staggering number of years Odysseus was away from his homeland of Ithaca, his wife Penelope, and his son Telemachus. To put that into perspective, he spent 10 brutal years fighting at Troy. But the true tragedy, the real gut punch, it took him another 10 terrifying years just to cross the ocean and get back home. Okay, let's dive into this. The entire narrative of this epic really revolves around one central internal battle. Think of it like a massive tug of war. On one side, you have his cunning mind, his absolute tactical brilliance. But on the other side, an arrogance that constantly wars against that intellect and repeatedly threatens to destroy him and his entire crew. So, almost immediately after setting sail from the ruins of Troy, things go wrong. They stop for supplies at Issamara, but are ambushed by a Thracian tribe called the Phaiakians and are forced to retreat. Then, out of nowhere, a massive storm blows them entirely off course. Totally lost and out of supplies, they land on the island of the lotus-eaters. Now, the locals there offer the crew this lotus fruit, which contains a powerful drug that basically wipes their memories. It makes them want to just sleep there forever. Odysseus literally has to physically drag his drugged men back to the ships to make a quick escape. Next up, they find themselves trapped in a cave with Polyphemus. He's a giant cyclops who terrifyingly immediately eats 2 of the crew members. Now, overpowering a giant physically, impossible. So Odysseus relies on his famous intellect to execute this brilliant 4-step plan. First, he gets the giant drunk on some traded wine. Then, when the cyclops asks his name, Odysseus famously calls himself Nobody. Step 3, once the giant passes out, Odysseus blinds him with a sharpened wooden stake. Finally, to bypass the giant boulder blocking the cave door, the men tie themselves to the undersides of the giant's sheep. They just slip right past the blind Cyclops' hands as he lets his flock out to graze in the morning. The absolute sheer brilliance of this trick really reveals itself in the aftermath. When Polyphemus screamed out in agony from being blinded, the other Cyclopes from across the island rushed over. They're banging on the rock, asking who was hurting him, and the giant screamed back this exact quote, "Nobody is killing me. Nobody." Utterly confused, the other Cyclops just kind of shrugged and walked away. It was a flawless, absolutely perfect escape plan. But here is where that fatal hubris kicks in. Overcome by the high of his own brilliant achievement, Odysseus makes a massive, costly mistake. As his ships sail away to safety, he just can't help himself. He taunts the Cyclops and shouts his true name, Odysseus, the famous hero of the Trojan War. Because of this totally unnecessary arrogance, Polyphemus now has a name, and he gives that name to his father, Poseidon, the god of the sea, who he prays to for revenge. And man, that curse from Poseidon dictates the rest of this entire timeline. Poseidon dooms Odysseus to lose his entire crew and wander the deadly seas for a full decade before he can ever set foot in Ithaca again. This lost decade includes a whole year trapped on a witch's island and 7 agonizing years held captive by a goddess. The scale of this punishment is just devastating. What makes this curse even more tragic is how insanely close they actually got to home. King Aeolus gifts Odysseus a magical leather bag containing the power of the winds. Guys, Ithaca is literally in sight. But when Odysseus falls asleep, his crew, driven by greed and assuming the bag is just stuffed with gold, rip it open. The winds explode out, blowing their ships entirely backward. Aeolus refuses to help a cursed crew twice, which is fair enough. Shortly after, they land at the harbor of the Laestrygonians. These are giant, bloodthirsty cannibals who pelt them with boulders, completely destroying every single ship, except for Odysseus's. Limping away with just that one single ship, the traumatized crew arrives at the island of a beautiful witch named Circe. She invites the men to dine, but secretly slips a potion into their food that literally transforms them into pigs. So the crucial point here is how Odysseus saves them. He gets intercepted by the messenger god Hermes, who gives him a magic herb called moly. By secretly consuming this moly, Odysseus easily resists Circe's magic, draws his sword, and basically threatens her until she turns his men back into humans. After spending a whole year with Circe,
She advises him to visit the underworld. Down there, Odysseus summons the spirit of the blind prophet Tiresias, who delivers one absolute, life-or-death, non-negotiable rule for surviving the rest of the voyage. He says, whatever you do, when you reach the island of the sun god Helios, do not touch his cattle. If the cattle are harmed, death will follow. Plain and simple.
Back on the water, they have to sail past the sirens. These are terrifying creatures whose beautiful songs entice sailors to jump to their deaths. Notice the brilliant contrast in his strategy here. Odysseus protects his crew by having them plug their ears entirely with beeswax. But his own sheer, unyielding curiosity gets the better of him. He wants to be the first mortal to hear the bewitching song and actually survive. So he orders his deafened crew to tie him firmly to the ship's mast and utterly ignore his pleas for release. Immediately after, they face an impossible dilemma. Talk about being caught between a rock and a hard place. They have to sail through this incredibly narrow pass. On the right is Scylla, a terrifying six-headed sea monster. On the left is Charybdis, a massive whirlpool that swallows entire ships. Knowing Charybdis means total annihilation for everyone, Odysseus makes the heavy-hearted, grim choice to steer closer to Scylla. 6 monster heads swoop down, sacrificing 6 screaming men just to save the rest of the ship. And this brilliantly illustrates just how inescapable the gods can be, because the fulfillment of Poseidon's curse is swift and absolute. A storm strands the surviving, starving crew right on the island of the sun god. Driven mad by hunger, the men wait for Odysseus to fall asleep and they slaughter the forbidden cattle. Furious, the sun god complains to Zeus, who strikes their ship with a massive thunderbolt. After all that, it leaves exactly one single survivor of this carnage: Odysseus. Clinging to shipwreckage for 9 days, Odysseus washes up on the island of the goddess Calypso. She falls madly in love with him, even offering to make him completely immortal if he just stays with her. But he refuses. Insulted, she keeps him captive there for 7 agonizing years. Every single day, he rejects immortality, choosing instead to sit on the shore and weep for his wife and son. Finally, the goddess Athena convinces Zeus to force Calypso to let him go. Poseidon wrecks his makeshift raft one last time, but Odysseus barely swims to the island of the Phaiakians, washing up completely naked on their shores. Taken in by the king and queen, he hides his cursed name. But during a feast, a poet named Demodocus sings the glorious tale of the Trojan horse. Hearing the story of his own intellect and his fallen friends, Odysseus just breaks down weeping, finally revealing his true identity as the great hero of Troy. Deeply honored by his presence, the Phaiakians load him up with gold and sail him home. 20 years after he left, Odysseus finally steps foot on Ithaca, but Athena warns him his home is not safe. For 2 decades, his faithful wife Penelope has been pressured to remarry. Now, over 100 greedy suitors literally infest his palace, eating his food and demanding her hand in marriage. To protect him, Athena magically disguises Odysseus as an old beggar, so he can secretly scout his own home. But you know, Odysseus isn't the only genius in the family. Penelope matches her husband's towering intellect with incredible cunning of her own. Check this out. She promised the suitors she would pick a husband once she finished weaving a burial garment for Odysseus's father. So she wove all day, but secretly undid all her work every single night. This brilliant trick successfully stalled over 100 aggressive men for 3 entire years before she was finally caught. Meanwhile, disguised as a beggar, Odysseus seeks out his loyal servant, Eumaeus. Coincidentally, Odysseus' son, Telemachus, arrives at the exact same house, having just returned from searching for his father. When Eumaeus steps out, Athena drops the beggar disguise. In this deeply emotional moment, Telemachus falls to his knees weeping, and after 20 long years, father and son finally embrace. But they have a palace to take back. Odysseus re-enters his home, once again disguised as the old beggar. He arrives just as Penelope sets an impossible challenge for the suitors. She announces she will marry the man who can shoot an arrow perfectly through the heads of 12 axes lined up in a row. The catch? They must use Odysseus's incredibly rigid, heavy great bow. One by one, every single suitor fails to even string the heavy bow. It's too tough. Then, the ragged old beggar steps up. The entire hall howls with laughter, until it turns to dead silence. He effortlessly strings the weapon and fires an arrow perfectly through all 12 axes. Absolute, total badassery. Odysseus then turns the weapon on the suitors.
Panicking, the men reach for their weapons, only to realize Telemachus had secretly hidden them all. Together, father and son unleash their brutal wrath, striking down every last unarmed man to reclaim their home. With the palace finally quiet, Penelope embraces the husband she faithfully waited 20 years for. She looks at him, marveling at his survival, and asks where he has been all this time. With a smile and tears in his eyes, he delivers this profound, story-looping final line, "Where do I begin?" It perfectly brings the whole epic full circle. So I leave you with this thought to ponder. When you face the absolute worst storms in your own life, will it be your cunning that saves you or your hubris that sinks you? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.